Captain Ethan Mercer couldn't feel his left hand anymore. Heat crawled up his spine as a living alien sword rested between him and the woman he had saved. Around them, an entire relay network strained under the weight of a centuries-old constitutional ritual. Every extra heartbeat threatened to push a civilization past the point of recovery. If he let go, the process would fail. If he held on, something inside him would never work again. Welcome to Galactic Contact. Now, let's go back to the moment a single rescue changed the fate of two worlds. Ionized metal scraped across Captain Ethan Mercer's visor as another explosion rolled through the fractured corridor. He slammed one shoulder against a collapsing support beam and caught the armored figure before she disappeared into open space. The alien soldier outweighed him by nearly 100 pounds. It didn't matter. The emergency tether clipped onto both harnesses with a sharp metallic snap. The damaged corridor lurched again. Loose plating twisted free. A section of the ceiling peeled away. Shards of glowing alloy spun past like fragments of broken glass. Ethan planted his boots against the deck and pulled. The tether tightened until every muscle in his back burned. The unconscious Valkyrie shifted only a few inches. Then the station shuddered. Artificial gravity flickered. Both of them slid toward the widening breach. A silver blade drifted beside the injured woman. It neither spun nor tumbled with the escaping debris. Instead, it maintained the same precise distance from her shoulder, moving with quiet, deliberate stability while everything else spiraled into chaos. Ethan noticed it only for an instant. Then the corridor buckled beneath him. His medical scanner chimed. Pressure loss. Collapsed lung. Internal bleeding. The alien's armor had sealed itself around the wound, but the living plates could no longer compensate. He searched the cracked breastplate with gloved fingers until he found a narrow emergency pressure port hidden beneath overlapping layers of silver alloy. No standard connector, he muttered. His trauma injector didn't fit. The warning light on his wrist flashed red. Time remaining before critical oxygen loss. Less than 2 minutes. He looked once at the injector, then at the pressure valve. The polymer stabilizer cartridge. Close enough. Ethan tore the injector apart with both hands. Small components scattered across the damaged deck. He stripped the polymer insert free, shaved away one edge with his rescue knife, and forced the improvised seal into the alien valve. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then compressed air stopped hissing into space. The armor held. Barely. He locked the makeshift patch in place with medical tape wrapped directly around fractured plating. It wasn't elegant. It only had to survive the trip. Another explosion rippled through the corridor. The support beam behind him snapped. The tether jerked violently. Ethan was thrown forward, striking the deck hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. He grabbed the rescue line before it slipped from his gloves. Outside the breach, the stars remained perfectly silent. Inside, warning sirens competed with tearing metal. He pulled again. One step. Another. The unconscious Valkyrie crossed the threshold into the emergency airlock just as the remaining corridor disappeared into vacuum. The inner hatch slammed shut behind them. Atmospheric pressure returned with a violent rush. Only then did Ethan allow himself to breathe. Medical personnel flooded into the compartment. Several froze the moment they saw the silver sword. It hovered quietly beside the alien officer, still maintaining the exact same distance from her body. No restraints held it. No visible propulsion kept it aloft. One technician reached toward the weapon. The sword drifted sideways before his hand arrived, preserving the same measured spacing without changing its orientation. The technician stopped. So it isn't floating, he whispered. It's staying with her. Nobody answered. The transport team rolled the injured Valkyrie toward isolation. The sword followed in perfect silence. Ethan stripped off one glove and pressed 2 fingers against the side of the alien's neck where the medical scanner indicated a major artery. A pulse answered. Weak. Steady. Alive. The isolation door sealed before the transport reached its assigned berth. Negative pressure vents stripped the last traces of debris from Ethan's suit, while medical teams transferred the unconscious Valkyrie onto a reinforced treatment platform. The silver sword followed until it reached the threshold. There it stopped. It hovered in complete silence. The distance between the blade and Ceres never changed. A technician eased a composite examination cart beneath it. The sword settled onto the surface without resistance. When Ceres's stretcher rolled farther into the room, the blade glided across the cart by exactly the same amount, preserving its position beside her. The technician slowly let go. It corrected itself. Nobody rushed to explain what they had just seen. Ethan removed his gloves and stepped to the treatment table. The improvised polymer seal had begun separating along one edge. Pressures dropping again. A xenomedical specialist joined him. Our sealant won't bond. It doesn't have to. Ethan pointed toward the pressure valve. Keep the suit inflated. Treat the armor like an external cast until you're ready. The physician examined the damaged seam, adjusted the stabilization sequence, and gave a brief nod. That buys us time. The room came alive. Cutting tools opened damaged armor. Infusion lines connected to unfamiliar anatomy. Every instrument paused before touching living tissue no one fully understood. The first layer of armor finally released with a quiet mechanical sigh. Silver blood flowed steadily instead of spraying. Its metallic scent lingered only a moment before specialized filters drew it away. A fracture crossed Ceres's ribs beneath the living plates. Collapsed tissue. Internal bleeding. Recoverable. Ethan stepped aside as the xenomedical team continued their work. His job should have ended there. A soft metallic tap echoed through the room. The sword had tilted. Not toward Ceres. Toward Ethan. Only a few degrees. Enough for the nearest technician to notice. He frowned, circled the examination cart, and politely asked Ethan to move aside. The blade returned to its original position. The technician repeated the test from a different angle. The sword reacted the same way. Instead of saying anything, he placed a strip of removable tape on the floor where Ethan had been standing. A minute later, Ethan stepped back onto the mark without noticing. Faint blue currents appeared beneath the sword's polished surface. They vanished almost immediately. The technician swallowed. I'd like another witness. By the time two custodians entered the medical bay, the light had disappeared. Neither wore ceremonial robes. Both carried resonance prisms no larger than a notebook. One placed his prism beside the sword. The suspended crystal remained perfectly clear. The second custodian positioned another prism beside Ceres. Soft blue threads formed inside the crystal. Without exchanging a word, they traded instruments. The result remained the same. Then Ethan crossed behind them on his way toward the exit. Both prisms brightened. Not dramatically, just enough to cast pale reflections across the polished floor. The elder custodian lowered his instrument. It responds. His younger colleague watched the crystal settle before answering. It acknowledges. The distinction lingered between them. Footsteps approached from the corridor. Ambassador Helena Ortiz entered carrying a sealed diplomatic folder beneath one arm. You've already attracted 3 jurisdictions and 2 investigative committees. Ethan managed a tired smile. I've had quieter mornings. I believe you. Her attention shifted from the sword to the tape marks on the floor. What happened? The technician demonstrated instead of giving a speech. He repositioned the prism. Then he asked Ethan to step 3 feet to the left. Nothing happened. Ethan stepped back onto the tape. The crystal brightened again. The distance matters. Helena studied the improvised experiment before looking toward the treatment platform. Ceres's breathing had steadied. Her eyelids fluttered. A heartbeat later, her eyes opened. Gray-blue. Focused despite the medication. She surveyed the unfamiliar room just long enough to understand where she was. Then she found Ethan. The sword reacted first. Blue veins flowed beneath the living metal in one smooth wave before fading back into quiet silver. No alarm sounded. No containment system responded. The elder custodian inclined his head almost imperceptibly. I've never seen acknowledgement precede review. Ceres pushed herself upright despite the fresh surgical seals across her side. A human medic instinctively reached toward her. She raised one hand, not to refuse assistance, only to ask for another second. When the dizziness passed, she swung both feet onto the floor and stood under her own strength. Her balance faltered once. She recovered without help. Step by careful step, she crossed the room until only a few feet separated her from Ethan. Neither spoke. Ceres lowered her head. The gesture was measured, controlled, public. The younger custodian drew a slow breath. Helena looked between them. I take it that means something. The elder custodian never looked away from Ceres. It means the investigation just became far more complicated. Outside the isolation bay, security doors opened with mechanical precision. White and gold uniforms entered the corridor in disciplined formation. At their center walked High Marshal Kaler Thane. His eyes moved first to Saris, then to the sword. Only afterward did they settle on Ethan. His expression never changed. The atmosphere inside the room did. The elder custodian quietly closed the resonance prism in his hand. The hearing can't wait any longer. The hearing opened with the rescue tether placed at the center of the tribunal floor. Its outer fibers were scorched from the debris field. The braided material carried the marks of a violent return through broken station structure. Beside it rested Ethan's damaged injector housing. The improvised polymer insert remained fused inside the fractured casing. No speech introduced the evidence. The objects were enough. A recovery specialist unlocked the first container. The modification was manual. She rotated the injector beneath the chamber lights. No fabrication equipment was used. The reshaping marks matched Captain Mercer's gloves. She placed it back into the case. Without this repair, the alien officer would not have survived retrieval. The statement entered the record. A Vair engineer examined the hardened polymer. The alignment is imperfect. It wasn't designed for long-term use, Ethan replied. His voice remained calm. It only needed to hold pressure until extraction. The engineer studied the repair for another moment before returning it. The second container opened. The retrieval tether emerged. Small abrasions covered one section where damaged hull fragments had dragged across the fibers. A technician tested the same amount of force against the duplicate line. The sample snapped. The original tether did not. The load shifted during recovery, she said. Her attention moved briefly toward the sealed containment chamber at the edge of the room. The sword remained inside, silent. The tribunal recorder marked the observation. No conclusion followed, only evidence. The elder custodian entered the witness circle carrying a resonance prism. Instead of placing it beside the sword, he positioned it near the damaged tether. The crystal remained clear. He moved it closer to the repaired injector. Nothing changed. Then Ethan crossed the marked area leading toward the witness platform. Blue threads formed inside the prism. The custodian repeated the test from a different angle. The result remained. The chamber watched. No one rushed to explain. The response is reproducible, the elder custodian said. His assistant confirmed the measurement with a second prism. Independent verification. Same result. High Marshal Kaler Thane turned toward Ethan. You left the transport after receiving orders to remain aboard. I did. You understood Alliance casualties were still inside. I did. Why? Ethan looked toward the medical evidence before answering. The Marine had a chance to survive without immediate intervention. She didn't. The answer stayed on the record. No defense. No performance. Across the chamber, Sarah stood inside the witness circle wearing a temporary field uniform without command insignia. The Civil Assembly representative reviewed the mission timeline. Captain Mercer received no instruction from Vair Command. Correct. He acted independently. Correct. The representative closed the file. The fact remained. Another custodian approached carrying a narrow case. Inside rested a fragment recovered from Saris's damaged armor. Silver alloy. A fractured edge. A living surface that had once connected to the same biological system as the sword. The fragment was placed several feet from the containment chamber. Nothing happened. The custodian rotated it. The damaged surface faced the sword. A faint vibration passed through the table. The fragment shifted slightly, then stopped. The measurement was recorded. It recognizes shared structure, the custodian said. Ethan studied the fragment. So the reaction isn't traveling through empty space. The Vair engineer compared the readings. It follows compatible biological material. The chamber remained focused on the evidence. The conclusion narrowed the possibilities. It did not solve them. Kaler returned his attention to the official record. The rescue violated operational doctrine. He looked toward the damaged injector. The rescue also preserved a Vair officer whose testimony now affects constitutional review. Both statements remained. Neither erased the other. He approved the archive entry. The tribunal accepted the evidence without granting any faction the outcome it wanted. As the containers were sealed, the sword remained motionless inside its chamber. Only once did the living metal change. When Saris turned away from the witness circle, a slow current moved beneath its surface. The reaction lasted less than a second. The custodians noticed. No one interrupted the hearing. Instead, the elder custodian submitted a formal request. Access to every historical succession artifact preserved beneath the tribunal complex. The archive doors would open before the next station cycle. The archive chamber rested beneath the tribunal complex, separated from the station's main network. No relay traffic entered. No external update could reach the records stored there. That was intentional. The oldest constitutional memories existed inside living lattices suspended within transparent containment cylinders. They were grown, preserved, and carried forward through generations. Sarah stopped at the chamber entrance. To human eyes, the room appeared motionless. To their senses, faint electromagnetic waves moved through the support columns beneath the floor. Each pulse revealed the structure's condition. Stable. For now. The elder custodian unlocked the first cylinder with a physical key. Not a digital command. Not a remote authorization. A key. Every lawful succession preserved its original biological foundation. Helena examined the mechanism. No electronic safeguard. Some records existed before electronic systems. The custodian lifted the lattice and placed it beneath an optical reader. A narrow beam passed through the living material. Inside the structure, dark pathways appeared. Growth patterns. Repair traces. Centuries of adaptation preserved within the tissue. The custodian rotated the sample. Every bearer leaves biological residue. Another cylinder opened. Then another. Each lattice showed the same internal architecture. Different individuals. Same process. Ethan studied the repeated patterns. The repair begins at the center. It does. Then expands outward. Always. The final cylinder remained sealed. Its surface carried a newer marking. The custodian paused before opening it. This sample formed after Captain Vale regained consciousness. The fresh lattice entered the reader. The chamber waited. At first, nothing changed. Then the structure appeared. The growth pattern did not begin from one point. It began from two. Separate pathways expanded independently before joining deeper inside the living material. Helena looked from the new sample to the older records. That has never happened before. No. The custodian adjusted the reader. The change occurred before constitutional recognition. Saris watched the two pathways merge. The process started before anyone understood what they were seeing. Ethan looked toward the archive table. So every investigation assumed the wrong starting point. The custodian opened another compartment. Inside rested a dormant fragment from a previous sacred sword. Its living core had long since stopped responding. He placed it beside the new lattice. Nothing happened. The inactive fragment remained unchanged. The new lattice brightened along one branch. Only briefly. Only enough to confirm the difference. The custodian sealed the fragment again. The response is not based on ceremony. Helena watched the fading light. It is biological. Outside the archive, station lighting shifted as power moved between active sectors. The change lasted only seconds. A maintenance worker passed the corridor carrying replacement valves against one shoulder. He stopped beside an access panel, removed a damaged filter, checked the wear pattern, and continued without waiting for assistance. Small repairs. Constant repairs. Inside the archive, another custodian entered carrying a maintenance report instead of historical records. Synchronization arrays requested recalibration 3 additional times. The elder custodian looked up. The interval shortened. The younger custodian placed the report beside the previous ones. Nothing had failed. Everything required attention sooner. Ethan noticed a faint discoloration along the scanner housing. Heat damage. Recent. He did not touch it. The equipment is compensating harder. The archive technician opened the housing. Inside, repeated thermal expansion had worn the cooling fins smooth. Still functional. For how long? The question remained unanswered. Saris listened to the chamber. The returning vibration from one support column arrived slightly later than the others. A delay too small for human senses. Still visible to hers. The station is adjusting. She moved toward the physical structural model mounted against the far wall. A transparent cross-section of the relay network. No projection. No simulation. A physical representation built from layered composite. Her hand followed the path connecting the archive, synchronization chamber, and relay systems above. The adjustment is spreading. The elder custodian compared her observation with the maintenance reports. The routes aligned. Helena folded the documents. if the system keeps prioritizing verification. Ethan completed the calculation. Then every attempt to confirm the process consumes more of the system required to complete it. No one argued. The evidence already connected the pieces. The elder custodian returned the newest lattice to containment. The records explain every lawful succession. He secured the lock. They no longer explain this one. Above them, another recalibration request moved through the station network. This time, it reached the relay control center slower than expected. The relay control center occupied the station's inner ring. Every communication path passed through it before reaching the frontier. The room was never quiet. Cooling systems cycled without pause. Relay housings expanded and contracted with faint metallic clicks. Status lights changed as thousands of small decisions moved through the network. But something had changed. The timing had changed. An engineer placed 3 relay modules on the workbench. Each one came from a different tower. Each showed the same wear pattern. The switching contacts were polished, almost smooth. No burn marks. No broken components. Just years of operation compressed into a few days. Helena Ortiz turned one module beneath the inspection light. All 3. The engineer placed 4 more beside it. 7. He pointed toward the damaged contacts. We stopped checking after the pattern repeated. Ethan examined the surface. These didn't fail. No. The engineer removed his gloves. They did exactly what they were designed to do. Another technician arrived carrying a processor housing. The metal casing still held residual heat. Inside, the cooling channels showed fresh mineral buildup. We cleaned this system 2 days ago. The technician measured the deposits. The cycle rate increased again. Across the room, the custodians worked at separate stations. No shared display. No central conclusion. Each calculation was completed independently before comparison. The lesson had already been recorded in the damaged hardware. Sarah stood beside the relay viewport. To human eyes, the conduit network appeared still. To her senses, electromagnetic currents moved through the alloy in uneven waves. One signal arrived before another had finished fading. The system was not unstable. It was crowded. The elder custodian placed the newest biological lattice beside a recovered relay contact. Neither reacted. A synchronization request entered the network. The relay contact clicked. The lattice brightened. Then both returned to silence. The test repeated. The result remained. The systems coordinator unfolded a paper routing diagram across the table. No digital model. No automated summary. Only the paths engineers had marked by hand. The constitutional lattice sends a verification request. He traced the route. Relay 2 receives it. His finger moved. Relay 4 confirms the response. Another line. Every observer records the result. He marked 6 additional branches. Every confirmation consumes bandwidth. The room stayed focused on the diagram. He removed the observer paths. The remaining route reached completion. Then he restored them. The line stopped before the endpoint. Ethan studied the difference. The verification arrives after the event it was supposed to confirm. The coordinator nodded. Then another request begins. Helena followed the routes with her eyes. And the process repeats. The engineer placed the worn relay contact beside the diagram. The hardware isn't resisting the process. He looked toward the constitutional pathway. It's carrying the process. Different specialists reviewed the conclusion. Material fatigue. Relay engineering. Biological synchronization. Constitutional procedure. Every path led to the same constraint. The system was consuming its own capacity. The doors opened. High Marshal Kaler Thane entered. He reviewed the damaged components before looking at the routing diagram. No explanation was necessary. The evidence remained on the table. What options remain inside the charter? The elder custodian separated the procedures into groups. Partial synchronization. Rejected. Deferred authentication. Rejected. Remote succession. Unsupported. Every option returned to the same limitation. The law required a functioning system. The system was being consumed by the requirements surrounding it. Outside the control center, maintenance crews disconnected another secondary relay branch. Power redirected toward the core network. Service lighting dimmed along one corridor. A transport lift stopped for scheduled conservation. The station adjusted again. Inside the room, the coordinator recalculated the remaining interval manually, then compared it with the automated estimate. The values matched. He wrote the result on the edge of the routing sheet. 3 hours, 14 minutes. No one searched for a different answer. The numbers were already clear. Saris stepped closer to the paper. Her finger followed the relay route until it reached the constitutional lattice. Then stopped. The missing section was not hidden. It had never been questioned. The elder custodian noticed the same point. He closed the procedure manual. Another synchronization request entered the queue. The acknowledgement arrived later than the previous one. By the next station cycle, the emergency map outside operations had become smaller. Not because the station had recovered. Entire sections had been removed from routine service. Yellow barriers crossed corridors once used by freight crews. Portable atmosphere exchangers vibrated beside sealed bulkheads where the main circulation system had been reduced to conserve energy. The air felt warmer, drier. Repair carts moved through the restricted areas carrying replacement parts that had been reassigned from other departments. No announcement explained every change. People simply adapted around them. Ethan left the medical wing carrying a trauma kit instead of heading to the tribunal. A maintenance emergency had taken priority. Junction 9. Vertical cargo shaft. Multiple civilians trapped. The shaft doors stood open when he arrived. The freight platform had stopped halfway between levels after its braking systems received conflicting correction commands. One guide rail locked immediately. The second continued for a fraction of a second. That fraction was enough. A structural engineer held a manual gauge against the opening. Upper anchors are stable. Lower supports are accumulating stress. Fresh measurements covered the maintenance panel. Not printed. Not automated. Written by hand. Inside the lift, 5 workers surrounded an injured supervisor. His leg had been pinned beneath a fractured support brace before his co-workers freed him using manual tools. Blood soaked through the temporary bandage. The bleeding had slowed. The fracture had not. Ethan attached a compact medical sensor to the man's ankle. A weak arterial signal responded. Enough. He prepared the stabilization splint. The injured worker gripped a cargo strap. Don't remove the boot. Ethan checked the damaged limb. Why? Steel reinforcement is keeping everything aligned. Ethan adjusted the splint around the boot instead of cutting it away. The pressure lock sealed. Across the shaft, Saris arrived with 2 VAIR security officers. They remained behind the civilian workers. No command. No interruption. She studied the damaged mechanism. To human eyes, the guide rails appeared motionless. To her perception, electromagnetic stress patterns moved through the metal supports in uneven waves. One anchor corrected immediately. Another responded late. The third compensated for both. 3 systems. 3 separate rhythms. She stepped beside the engineer's handwritten calculations. The anchors are correcting independently. The engineer compared her observation with the recorded stress pattern. Isolation was supposed to prevent cascading failure. Saris adjusted the timing sequence. The corrections are creating another cycle. She connected the 3 adjustment paths into one order. The engineer watched the revised sequence, then called 2 technicians to separate control stations. Reset together. The hydraulic systems released in measured stages. The platform shifted slightly, then stopped. The grinding vibration disappeared. Nobody celebrated. The rescue continued. One worker climbed out. Then another. The youngest technician refused the harness until the injured supervisor was secured first. The supervisor pushed the harness back toward him. The argument lasted only seconds. Ethan solved it by connecting both of them to the same extraction line. Their combined weight distributed across the pulley system. The final evacuation began. A warning indicator changed. The structural engineer looked down. The lower bracket is failing. He checked the remaining support margin. 1 correction. No one asked for more time. The sensors had already provided the answer. The crane operator engaged the line. The last civilians cleared the platform. Seconds later, the lower bracket fractured. The empty cargo deck dropped several feet before emergency restraints caught it. The impact traveled through the shaft. Old insulation broke loose inside the wall cavity. Gray fragments drifted through the warm air and settled across abandoned equipment cases. The engineer crouched beside the damaged bracket. The fracture surface showed accelerated material fatigue. He wrapped the broken component and wrote the cause by hand. Failure accelerated by asynchronous correction cycles. Nearby workers looked toward Saris. No celebration. No ceremony. Some watched with curiosity. Others returned immediately to repairs. A maintenance supervisor approached carrying the grease pencil she had used earlier. "You left this." Saris accepted it, then placed it back into his hand. "The drawings need it." The supervisor returned to the control panel. The exchange lasted seconds. The people nearby noticed anyway. Later that cycle, relay engineers disconnected 2 more secondary circuits to preserve constitutional bandwidth. Another service district disappeared from the station map. The synchronization window continued shrinking, even as fewer systems remained available to support it. The resignation reached the custodian's circle before dawn. It contained a single document. No ceremonial seal. No public announcement. Only Saris Vale's handwritten authorization releasing command authority over the Frontier Vanguard under the constitutional provision for officers involved in active succession inquiries. The rule had existed for generations. Few remembered anyone choosing it. The chamber remained quiet as the document passed between custodians. High Marshal Kaler Thane read every line before folding the paper once. "You understand what follows." "I do." "You will retain your commission until the inquiry concludes." "I understand." "You will issue no operational orders." "I won't." The record updated. Command authority transferred. No accusation. No punishment. Just consequence. Outside the chamber, the decision moved through the station faster than the official notice. Some officers saw responsibility. Others saw weakness. The same action produced different conclusions. Neither side had enough evidence to settle the disagreement. Acting Captain Lauren Etris assumed operational control before the next station cycle. His first briefing did not blame Saris. It documented the cost. Relay capacity remained reserved for constitutional synchronization. Cargo routing operated through delayed schedules. Medical inventories required manual confirmation. Repair requests waited behind higher priority systems. Nothing had failed completely. Everything had become slower. Lauren removed 3 planned patrol routes from the board. The frontier had not become safer. The station simply no longer had the resources to support them. Ethan moved through the medical transit corridor, carrying printed patient summaries. The digital system still worked. Accessing it required relay authentication. Paper reached the next ward faster. A nurse stopped him beside a supply station. Emergency plasma filters never arrived. Ethan checked the request order. The shipment had been redirected twice. He changed direction immediately. Storage Section 12 had become a maze of temporary shelves and handwritten labels. Automated sorting remained offline. Workers compared printed manifests against updated cargo markings. A civilian clerk recognized the missing shipment. "They're here." 3 sealed containers sat behind an incorrect inventory tag. The clerk removed the hold marker manually. No approval request. No waiting. The filters moved. Saris walked through the same maintenance levels where workers had once watched her from a distance. Her uniform carried no command insignia, only tribunal identification. Some workers acknowledged her. Some avoided eye contact. Others continued repairing equipment without reacting. She accepted all 3. At Junction 9, the damaged cargo shaft had already been dismantled. Fresh guide rails waited for installation. The old correction sequence remained preserved inside the maintenance manual. The supervisor noticed her reading it. "We're applying the same order to the remaining lifts." He returned to tightening an anchor bolt. The statement carried no gratitude, no resentment, only work. The relay coordinator arrived at the archive carrying another maintenance report. The interval between synchronization requests had shortened again. Cooling demand increased. Relay congestion spread beyond the constitutional network. Ordinary station traffic now experienced delays. The elder custodian opened a blank notebook. The old procedures described lawful succession. They did not describe a constitutional process consuming the infrastructure required to support it. He closed the notebook. No amendment written in haste could repair a system already running out of time. Helena requested a restricted meeting. 4 people attended. Kaler, Saris, Ethan, Helena. No advisors. No observers. She placed the relay calculations beside the routing diagrams. The latest estimate remained unchanged. The margin did not. 2 hours, 06 minutes. Kaler studied the numbers. The decline accelerated. The shutdowns reduced competing traffic, Helena said. She pointed toward the disconnected service routes. They also reduced redundancy. Ethan followed the missing pathways. "We preserved the process." His eyes remained on the diagram. We weakened the system carrying it. Nobody answered. The station answered for them. A distant impact traveled through the structure, metal adjusting under stress. Closer than before. That evening, Saris returned alone to the medical isolation bay where Ethan had first stabilized her. The treatment platform now held another patient. The examination cart had been moved to storage. Only one thing remained. A faded strip of tape on the floor, the place where the sword's reaction had first been measured. She stopped there. The sword rested inside its containment field several feet away. Saris approached, then stopped before reaching it. For the first time since the rescue, she did not attempt to preserve the process exactly as it had always existed. The investigation had not been the mistake. The assumption had been. The system could not examine a change without becoming part of that change. The realization offered no immediate solution. The countdown continued. Outside the isolation bay, emergency lighting dimmed for 3 seconds before auxiliary power restored it. Workers kept moving. The station had adapted to interruptions. The synchronization estimate continued falling. The synchronization chamber had already been reduced to its final configuration. No observer galleries. No unnecessary monitoring stations. No secondary authentication circuits. Only the systems required by the constitutional process remained active. Emergency lighting traced the walls in narrow bands. Beyond the chamber, the station continued conserving power. Cargo operations had stopped. Several maintenance sections had gone dark. Medical procedures waited. Every available resource had been redirected toward one final attempt. The relay coordinator placed the latest timing sheet beside the original routing map. The remaining window was written in the margin. 41 minutes. The elder custodian checked the entry once, then locked the document away. No further calculations would change the situation. Saris entered wearing the same temporary uniform she had carried since surrendering command authority. No insignia, no ceremonial armor. Only the person who had to make the decision. Kaler arrived moments later. He examined the disconnected consoles around the chamber. Every unnecessary verification path had already been removed. The system is inside legal limits. The elder custodian looked toward the remaining relay path. Only barely. Kaler accepted the answer. The limits were real. So were the consequences. Ethan entered through the medical access corridor carrying a compact neural stabilization interface. The same device used in advanced trauma procedures. Portable. Limited. Designed to maintain damaged neural pathways during emergency treatment. Nothing more. The relay coordinator recognized the equipment. It was never built for this. Ethan placed the interface beside the synchronization terminal. It doesn't need to be. The custodian studied the connection points. The device cannot authenticate succession. It won't. The device cannot replace the relay. It won't. Ethan connected the first lead. It only keeps the biological pathway open long enough for the relay to finish. No one questioned what that required. The interface had no protection system designed for sustained constitutional current. The damage prediction was already visible. Saris approached the containment field. The sword remained suspended inside. Still, patient. The barrier withdrew. The living blade moved forward. It settled into her hands. Blue currents traveled beneath its surface. The elder custodian initiated the lawful synchronization sequence. The chamber responded. Mechanical relays engaged deep inside the station. Cooling systems increased output. Relay contacts moved through their final verification cycles. Nothing appeared miraculous. Everything followed the same rules that had brought them here. For several minutes, the process remained stable. Then the first delay arrived. One relay acknowledgement returned late. Another repeated verification. The coordinator marked each event manually. The system was behaving exactly as predicted. The margin was disappearing. A warning indicator changed color. The neural interface activated. Ethan connected the final electrode. The medical unit synchronized with his peripheral nervous system. The first increase appeared. Thermal load. Then signal density. Then conduction stress. The interface compensated. Once. Twice. Then the protection threshold reached its limit. The safety system disengaged. There was no lower setting available. The relay pathway continued through him. Ethan's fingers tightened around the support frame. The first loss of movement reached his left hand. Then his right arm began responding slower. The medical monitors tracked the damage. No alarm changed the calculation. No adjustment removed the cost. The sword's blue currents weakened. Not because the process failed, because one final authentication branch remained incomplete. Saris looked toward the inactive witness circuit, the ceremonial observation path, required by tradition, not required by the biological sequence. She crossed the chamber. The elder custodian followed her movement. The charter permits the bearer to waive ceremonial observation. Saris placed her hand on the release mechanism. The record will show the decision. The final witness circuit disconnected. One relay path disappeared. The routing diagram shortened. The remaining process recovered. Barely. Enough. The synchronization entered its final phase. The sword grew lighter in Saris's hands. The living metal carried the same current through both of them. The bearer. The bridge. The relay. Ethan's vision blurred. The diagnostic tone became distant. His dominant arm stopped responding. He adjusted the interface connection with his remaining control. The movement cost seconds. The relay held. One final authentication completed. The coordinator marked the last line. The system recognized the sequence. Saris lowered the sword. Then she extended it toward Ethan. Not as a replacement. Not as a transfer of lawful ownership. As a voluntary surrender of exclusive control. The choice belonged to her. The responsibility remained. Ethan placed his hands against the blade. Saris kept holding the opposite end. The circuit remained continuous. The constitutional lattice responded. Relay timing stabilized. Cooling demand dropped. Across the station, delayed acknowledgments returned to normal intervals. The synchronization completed. The sword's currents faded beneath the silver surface. Its weight returned fully to Saris. The lawful bearer remained. The process had succeeded. Ethan released the neural interface. His body reacted before he could steady himself. One leg failed. Then his right arm. Medical personnel reached him immediately. The examination lasted seconds. The conclusion arrived without uncertainty. Permanent motor pathway damage. The relay was complete. The injury remained. Across the chamber, Kaler watched the medical team stabilize him. Then he looked toward Saris. The sword rested in her hands again. The same weapon. The same bearer. A different understanding of what the role required. The Constitution stands. The elder custodian looked toward the completed record. It does. Outside the chamber, the station continued turning. Scarred. Operational. Changed. The first relay status report arrived 43 hours after synchronization completed. It fit on a single printed page. Cooling demand had returned to stable operating levels. Authentication delays had stopped accumulating. Several secondary systems reopened. Others remained offline. The station was functioning again. It was not restored. Damaged relay assemblies still waited behind sealed maintenance barriers. Entire sections required replacement parts that had not yet been manufactured. Recovery had started. The evidence of failure remained visible. Ethan Mercer sat beside the rehabilitation window with his latest medical report in his hand. Outside the glass, transport platforms moved through the reopened transit ring. Repair crews crossed between unfinished sections. Life continued around the damage. His left arm remained inside a support brace. The fingers did not respond. The therapists had stopped measuring progress in days. They measured it in small changes. A different grip. A longer movement. A little more control from the pathways that remained. The physician reviewed the final neurological assessment. The damage has stabilized. Ethan looked toward his motionless hand. Permanent. The physician did not avoid the answer. Yes. The report closed. No promise replaced the result. Only the next stage of adaptation. The custodian circle reconvened inside the tribunal chamber. The rescue tether returned to the central platform. The fractured injector housing rested beside it. The worn relay contact sat nearby. 3 pieces of evidence. 3 parts of the same chain. The elder custodian addressed the assembly. The inquiry found no unlawful succession. He turned the page. The constitutional lattice performed within design parameters. Another page. The relay network exceeded sustainable demand because established verification procedures accumulated beyond available capacity. The chamber remained still. Not from agreement. From recognition. Every institution had followed its purpose. The combined result had created a failure none had predicted. High Marshal Kaler stood. His rank remained unchanged. His authority remained intact. His report did not. The document included delayed maintenance funding, repeated procedural duplication, and his own assumption that verification could continue without affecting the system being verified. The Defense Council accepted some recommendations, rejected others. The reforms entered committee review. Arguments continued. The crisis had ended. The politics had not. The first infrastructure changes appeared throughout the station. Observer circuits were separated into scheduled verification windows. Relay capacity was reserved before authorization requests entered the system. Maintenance priority became mandatory rather than optional. Every major approval now displayed its resource cost. Engineers complained. Administrators argued. Nobody removed the changes. The price of ignoring them was still visible in the walls. Saris returned to Junction 9. The cargo shaft had been rebuilt. Fresh guide rails reflected the work lights above. The original correction sequence had been transferred into the maintenance manual. No name appeared beside it, only the procedure. A supervisor noticed her reading the updated instructions. The engineering board approved the sequence. Saris looked over the page. A simple adjustment. A small change. A system that would now protect people it had once endangered. She returned the manual. The supervisor placed it back into storage. Work continued. Later, Saris entered the rehabilitation wing, carrying the sacred sword. No guards followed. No ceremony waited. Ethan looked up from his medical brace as she approached. The living blade rested across her open hands. Blue currents moved beneath the surface. Quiet. Steady. She extended the sword toward him. The gesture required no audience. No command. No claim. Ethan studied the weapon. Then he reached forward with his working hand. He did not take the hilt. He touched the flat of the blade. The sword remained still. Saris continued holding it. The moment lasted only long enough to be recorded by the medical sensor beside the chair. No transfer. No challenge. Only acknowledgement. She returned the sword to its sheath. The lawful bearer remained unchanged. The privilege surrounding that role had not. Weeks later, the frontier convoys resumed departure schedules. The station still carried scars from the emergency. Some corridors remained under repair. Some reforms remained under debate. Some people still questioned the decisions made during the crisis. Trust had not arrived all at once. It had been rebuilt through procedures, evidence, and repeated choices. At the departure concourse, Ethan moved slowly. His brace adjusted with every step. Simple movements required planning now. The same station that had once measured him by speed now measured him by what remained possible. Near the docking gate, Saris waited beside the departing transports. The sword rested at her side. A child passing through the concourse noticed the weapon and stopped. Saris lowered her head in the same measured gesture she had given in the medical bay after waking. The child copied it, then followed the rest of the family toward the transport. The moment disappeared into the movement of the crowd. Beyond the station windows, ships crossed the darkness in steady formation. Behind them, the repaired relay network continued carrying signals between worlds. Not because the damage had vanished, because the people who survived it had changed what they were willing to carry. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you were in Ethan and Saris's place, would you accept the same cost to protect a future you might never personally benefit from? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Galactic Contact for more cinematic stories from beyond the stars.